care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow.
Welcome to the Oshow, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. I'm your host, Laura Babcock. And just before sitting down to record this podcast, and I met somebody who said to me that they have concerns about the rising amount of homelessness in our communities, but that they liked Doug Ford. So I took the opportunity to discuss some of Ford's policies and choices and how that is impacting the homeless crisis, not the least of which was the decision early on to get rid of rent controls, which of course has had a huge impact, especially in the Hamilton area, but also ODSP and the fact that it is underfunded despite promises by the Ford government way back to make sure that it would get increased. How people live in this province with a disability and are able to buy food and get an apartment or somewhere else to live in this affordability crisis, well, guess what? They can't. And we are seeing more and more people end up having to choose between food or rent, living in a lot of stress and fear. And there are solutions, not just ODSP and rent controls. There are other things that can be done to make life for people who have disabilities much better in this province. And so here to talk about this, not just the homelessness part of it, but also other challenges facing people who are living with a disability in Ontario. And I think probably this extrapolates across Canada. I have Tim Nolan with me. Tim, you started an organization or part of an organization, which is an aha moment, Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, aha. So welcome to the Oshow, and tell me how you came to start the group, Tim, and then if you will, just help us to understand, our listeners and viewers to the Oshow, what is really going on with people who have accessibility issues or disabilities in Ontario today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. So I'll try to be very quick about this, but I lost my eyesight literally overnight back in 1981, and I was following that loss of eyesight. I was supported by a large group of individuals and organizations across the city, and eventually made my way to getting a university degree, and eventually made my way to working at McMaster. And in my many years at McMaster, and I worked there for 31, I retired in 2020. I met a lot of great people who have strong interests in accessibility and the impact of accessibility upon people with disabilities. Post-retirement, I continued work as a volunteer with the city. I've been a member of the city's Disability Advisory Committee for the past 22 years, and even the Region's Advisory Committee before that. And I was trying to find a way to understand, prior to the 2022 election, what the opinions and attitudes are of city councillors with respect to accessibility. The city told us that we weren't allowed to do that through the advisory committee. So I decided to investigate on my own. And I thought to myself, if I sent out a survey to candidates for municipal election under the name of Tim Nolan, people might not respond, wondering who the heck is this Tim Nolan guy? So I created a pseudonym called Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, surveyed candidates, and got a good understanding of what the perspectives are of city councillors who sit around the table today with respect to accessibility and disability. I realized soon after that there was a great opportunity under the AHA umbrella to actually go beyond that. And so most recently, I have, under the AHA, worked towards the development of two initiatives in the city, Disability History Month for the month of September, and an accessibility film festival in the city of Hamilton, neither of which existed prior, and fundamentally neither of which exist anywhere in Canada. So Hamilton will be the first. And as part of that, it's, I realize and I understand that there are so many different challenges that face people with disabilities in the community, and much of that comes down to choice. The barriers, arbitrary or otherwise, that exist in our community make it difficult for many people with disabilities to simply have the freedom of choice, to self-determination. And so I guess it's a long way of saying, hopefully the objective will be to try to educate and encourage fuller accessibility in the community so that all people with disabilities have the freedom of choice.
Well, I think that framing is so important, right? It's about people being able to make the same kind of decisions about their life that people who don't happen to have a disability don't even maybe reflect on, Tim. I certainly have learned a lot in the last 6 months working with people experiencing hunger and homelessness, and I see a lot of people who have challenges with their having a disability, whose challenges I often remark, I don't know how they get through their week, whether it is, as I mentioned off the top, a lack of support, the ODSP not nearly meeting rent and food costs in this affordability crisis that we're having, or whether it's people in precarious housing concerned about being rent evicted, right, since they don't have those protections, or whether it's people who can't get to where they need to because of snow clearing issues, or pathways that aren't thought about when people just park up on sidewalks or block things, or the city doesn't do this or that or the other thing. And for some of us who have access to vehicles or who don't have any mobility issues, we take it for granted, and we don't really understand. So on sort of the top of your list, what are the things that you would love people to understand about the view of people who have need accessibility, who might have mobility challenges or disabilities?
And it's a great question, and I mean, you've kind of touched on it. I mean, so much of choice is based upon economics, and for many people who live on ODSP, the choices are not easy. There is so little income; they have to choose between food, rent, um, foregoing other things that many of us just simply take for granted. Um, Cable television station, um, uh, um, the ability to go to a movie as we wish. There's so many different things. Like, um, recently the city's created this fare assist bus payment program initiative approved by council. Um, there are many people with disabilities who received complimentary bus fare in the past. Now they have to pay for their bus fare. That's not necessarily a hardship for everybody, but for somebody, excuse me, for somebody who's got um, economic challenges, particularly somebody who's on ODSP, how do they pay for bus fare when they can't even pay rent? Um, and so, and how does somebody choose what to buy or where to buy their food? I mean, if there isn't a no frill store on every street corner, excuse me. So, the lowest cost place to shop isn't necessarily available unless somebody actually has to travel. Now, if you can't afford to pay for bus fare, how do you get to the grocery store? So, there's so many things. I mean, I delegated to city council 2 years ago on snow removal. Last winter was not a bad winter for snow in Hamilton. Um, but I challenged city councilors. I said, when a plow comes up the road and creates what they call windrows, that's the snow at the side of the road. I said, those plows block in the curb cuts for sidewalks. I said, the city doesn't come along and clear the curb cuts. They don't clear the snow away from the roadway for the curb cuts. And I said to councilors, so why do you spend all the money that you do to build curb cuts when they're unavailable to people for 6 months of the year? Like, it makes absolutely no sense. So, I could go on and on. I mean, there's been recent conversations with the HSR, the conventional bus service here in Hamilton, because buses are not fully accessible. The pre-boarding and onboarding stop announcement information does not work all the time, or you can't hear it because the speakers are not loud enough. And so, now that the city is requiring people with disabilities to pay for bus fare, my question to the city is, You're charging us for something that's completely inaccessible to us. Is that compliant with human rights legislation? On is it simply reasonable? Um, so yeah, all of these issues they add up, and that's part of why I'm doing hopefully what I'm doing under the umbrella of the Accessibility Hamilton Alliance to try to
Well,
bring attention to the broader community in a way that maybe the broader community can also step up to the plate to help push these issues in a way that makes the community more accessible to everybody.
well, Tim, you reached out to the Oshow, and I appreciate you doing so to come on and speak about this, and coming up to the September month that you're focusing the attention on this issue. On a couple of the points that you made regarding the snow clearing, there were two times I remember I made a post last year or maybe the winter prior, where I saw a person in a wheelchair going down the middle of live traffic down near one of our hospitals because there was insufficient clearing of the sidewalks. And I thought, if we can't even get this right a block away from a hospital in this town, what are we doing? And then I think last year, maybe it was, I was walking back from the store and I saw a senior having to walk again down live traffic on my street this time because there was no way, if they were on the sidewalk, to ever get over that snow to be able to get back to go to the next sidewalk. They would be stuck on this sidewalk all the way around the block because they simply couldn't get over it. And and I posted a video, and it got thousands and thousands of views because I think, to your point, if we don't see it from the perspective of other people, I mean, I can just hop over that little pile of snow, right? But if you are somebody with a walker, as this person was, or you're in a wheelchair or some other mobility device, or you have young children in strollers and you don't have the strength to carry them up over that snow, it creates an accessibility issue. And so where is our city council in terms of understanding the importance of clearing the snow fully so that people can use their sidewalks in the winter? I mean, have we made progress on that issue, Tim?
Well, I hope we have. I've certainly delegated to Public Works, the Committee of Council on that matter. I guess we'll have to wait and see whether or not uh, the communications have gotten through. A staff report was supposed to come forward. I don't know if it did, but they're supposed to be dealing with snow clearing in a more comprehensive way. Part of the challenge is the HSR was supposed to be responsible for clearing bus stops, while Public Works was responsible for clearing roadways, and somebody else is responsible for clearing sidewalks, like property owners. And the three can't get together
Right. And you know
to create any kind of uniform approach. And if I might add,
what?
um, uh, the current snow clearing policy for the city says that property owners must clear their snow within 24 hours at the cessation of a snowfall. Well, the problem is, the problem with that policy is if snow stopped falling today at 2 o'clock, but then you got a couple of flakes at 4 o'clock, well, did it stop falling at 2 or did it stop falling at 4? I have personally proposed to City Council that they change the bylaw so that the policy requires that property owners clear their snow within 24 hours at the start of a snowfall, as opposed to the end. And some councillors seem to like the idea, but there was no appetite on the part of City Council to change the bylaw. Despite the fact that the Supreme Court of Canada ruled on this issue on October 21st in 2021, and I know that date because it happened to be my father's birthday. So on October 21st of 2021, the Supreme Court ruled on this and cited that property owners were not responsible for clearing their snow, particularly in business areas, but in fact the city is obligated. But the city of Hamilton has decided to ignore that Supreme Court ruling.
So
Bylaw.
how can they get away with that? And I don't understand Mayor Andrea Horvath, of all, I our Osho viewers would know, especially after Graham Crawford's appearance on the previous Osho, which everyone should check out. I feel as though she's failing on a whole bunch of fronts, but this issue around accessibility. I mean, as the former head of the NDP provincially, I would have thought this would be an opportunity for more equitable policies. How can they ignore the Supreme Court? And has she justified or explained why they aren't taking these suggestions or trying to make it more accessible, Tim?
Not to me, they haven't. But I'm going to be meeting with the city manager in the middle of September,
Okay.
and I'm hoping that I can hopefully um, um, uh, make some strong recommendations to the city manager on how to better deal with issues of accessibility. You know, and it comes back to, and you've talked about it yourself here. It really does come down to choice. I mean, I'm supposed to be on the sidewalk. That's what I'm required to do. But in the wintertime, I can't be on the sidewalk. And so what's my choice? My choice is to walk on the road unsafely, where the snow has been cleared, by the way, or if I can get onto the sidewalk, I can't guarantee that I'm ever going to get off. I suggested to city councilors when I delegated back a couple of years ago, I said, it's interesting. We use volunteers to clear the sidewalk, but we use paid equipment to clear the road. I said, why don't we switch it up? Why don't we use volunteers to clear the road and use the paid equipment to clear the sidewalks? Because everybody can use the sidewalk, but not everybody can use the road. And I was met with sort of dumbfounded silence.
Well, because it's a paradigm shift, to put it that way. The argument I've heard is, well, ambulances need to have safe passage on the roads, and I think, yeah, it's important to clear the roads, especially for ambulances. But also, how many slips and falls and broken hips and other things happen because people are unsafe on sidewalks trying to navigate the snow, right, or end up on live traffic lanes, as we've discussed, because they can't use the sidewalk. So it seems counterintuitive to me, Tim, that they're not making the sidewalks, to your point, the priority because everybody can use them. And then the roads, while I accept that emergency vehicles need passage, we have to give people at least as much help and support as we give to vehicles, right, into vehicle traffic. Let me just talk quickly, though, about the bus thing with you. When that came out, I couldn't believe it. And I was having conversations with people with disabilities and people who were struggling mightily in homelessness or precariously housed, who were telling me that that was going to be an immense burden. One woman shared a story with me about how she has to take her partner who has a severe disability with her to her job where she only gets a few shifts a week and doesn't make enough, but just enough for them to kind of have a roof and food. But because of the bus charge and not being able to have her partner take the bus for free, wasn't going to be able to bring that person with her to work, wasn't then going to be able to keep her job, right? So I mean, that just hearing that, it was like, what kind of decision making rationale would they have to suddenly start charging people with a disability bus fare? It must be such a small amount of gain that they're making as a city, but it is just in her one case going to deprive their family of an income. So what is their rationale, Tim, around what I thought was an absolutely ignorant decision that council made recently?
I'm not sure I can uh, do justice to the rationale. It's my understanding that because okay, so I have to go back in history. So people with disabilities, people who are blind or visually impaired, have received complimentary bus fare for decades, going back as far back as we can tell to the 1950s post-war. Um, uh, Veterans who were blinded, and so it was extended to anybody who was registered with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. In the 1990s, when low floor buses uh, started to come aboard, only rear doors were accessible. So there was no ramps at the front doors, only a rear door. So a person who uses a mobility device could only board and exit the bus at the rear door. Well, the HSR was not going to put a fare box at the rear door, and bus drivers were not going to carry passenger bus fares to the
Hmm.
to pay for their buses,
Yeah.
their bus rides. So complimentary bus fare was extended to people who needed to board and deboard the bus at the rear. But legislation changed, and in the early 2000 teens, City Council, in compliance with the AODA, but wanted to issue bus fares to persons with disabilities, which I don't necessarily have a problem with that conceptually, except it should be charged to persons with disabilities who can afford to pay for it rather than those who can't. So anybody on ODSP shouldn't be paying for bus fare, in my mind. But that said, there was pushback, and council sought an opinion from the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission stated that they could charge a fare, but they weren't obligated to charge a fare. So that said, the HSR was supposed to come up with a new bus fare policy. They did, but they didn't properly, in my mind, consult the disability community in the compilation of a staff report to city council. Persons with disabilities who did speak to the policy were not properly cited in that report, and council then made a decision based upon incomplete information as far as I'm concerned. So there's been a lot of pushback from the disability community to reverse that decision. Council delayed it as a reconsideration motion, but there can be no further action. So fast forward to now, I am working with, the AHA is working with a number of groups in the community seeking consultation and ultimately a decision on changing that decision, so that at the very least, hopefully, people with disabilities who live at or below the low income measure will again receive complimentary bus fare. That's my hope. And so that's what we're working towards.
I mean, and I've heard it said, Tim, and we'll kind of end on this conversation around ODSP. I've heard it saying that it's legislated poverty because I don't know if you know off the top of your head the current ODSP rates in Ontario, but I know it's very hard to get an apartment in this town for less than a couple $1,000s a month, which blows my mind how expensive it is. Even a room in some of our audience's listening area is that much money, just a single room, not even an apartment. So, I mean, is it legislated poverty? And I mean, I love the fact of, please, let's at least give people on ODSP free bus fare. It seems basic. But more broadly, what should ODSP be so that it's a livable amount of money for people?
Yeah, I absolutely agree it's legislative poverty, and part of the challenge is what do we impose by that? Like, what does it really mean when we say legislative poverty? And why is there, this is a big, broad question, but why is there seemingly a need to keep people living at or below the poverty line? I don't even know if living at the poverty line is really going to be enough for people. It would certainly help. I mean, I know somebody who's on ODSP whose annual income is south of $15,000 a year. I don't know how anybody lives at $15,000 a year or less. So I think there needs to be a bit of a paradigm shift in the way we think about accessibility and the way we characterize disability in the broader community. And how, I think there's enough research to show that a community that is richer and maybe this is the wrong word, but a community that is richer is actually better off. And that's not to suggest that everybody needs to be a millionaire, or we should all. I don't know what I'm suggesting, but at the end of the day, I think. Yeah. I think we need to just simply do more for those who can't do for themselves. And it should not necessarily be through just simply giving them more money. But some may require that, but that shouldn't necessarily be the sole solution. I think we need to make the community more accessible to allow people to have the freedom to choose, have a greater sense of self-determination, and then be able to go out and contribute to the community in the best way they can.
100%. And one of the first promises that Doug Ford broke when he got into office the first time was he promised the basic income pilot would continue, which had been seeing some success, and then that got canceled. So I think there are a range of policy reversals that could make things a lot better. There's a range in whether it's the bus fare issue in Hamilton, them complying with the sidewalk ruling, they should be anyway. The fact that, rent controls could be back in place, or some kind of rent cap. ODSP being properly funded to at least the poverty line, as you said, which is nothing anyway, but above the poverty line would be ideal to a living place. And then accessibility choices so that people can get back and work. The example I said about this woman having to give up her job because of the bus fare now. I mean, we have to look more holistically at our society and say, if everybody is given equal opportunity and people who really can't do for themselves are given support, won't we all be richer and our community be safer and more successful for everybody? And I think that I love what you're doing, Tim. I want to applaud you for doing it. You don't need my applause, but I am very impressed at the fact that you have the patience to put forward these policy recommendations, to do these presentations to council, even when you're not getting, the kind of rapid response or timely response that one would hope you would get talking about such important issues to our community. But I thank you for that. And so just as we end here, is AHA going to become a national movement, Tim? Are you keeping it local to Hamilton? And what is this September History Month all about?
So the whole idea of Disability History Month is to try as best as we can to demonstrate that people with disabilities in history and how people with disabilities are portrayed, particularly in film. That's the rationale for the film festival. Is that we can, how have people been portrayed and how have people contributed in the past to a healthier and wealthier community, and I think it's we want to showcase that people have done things, and I know we're probably running out of time, but I'm sight impaired. I was sight impaired before I worked at McMaster for 31 years, and I'd like to think that my work was very productive during my years. We graduated somebody from the School of Medicine in the mid 1990s who was deaf, and he went on to become a practicing family physician in Toronto, and he is culturally deaf. I think we need to showcase these efforts on the part of people with disabilities and show that the community was better for their presence, regardless of disability, and using that as a launching pad, if I could, for the future.
Extremely well said. I agree. I think we're better when we see and value and give everybody choice and opportunity and remove barriers. Thank you so much, Tim Nolan. And where can people find out more information if they want to support your efforts or if they want to advocate for other people in our community?
Well, we've got a website that hasn't gone live yet, but it should be coming up soon. It's Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, all one word, at .org. They can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Accessibility Hamilton, and Instagram, all under I think if anybody wants to look up Accessibility Hamilton or Accessibility Hamilton Alliance, they should probably find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We will make sure that they do. I will tag you on all those platforms when the podcast goes up. And best of luck with what you're doing. And I know a lot of politicians watch this program and activists. So hopefully, Tim, you'll get some more support in those conversations around snow clearing, around the bus issue. I mean, these are two examples and a myriad of examples where we can do a whole lot better in our public policy, and ODSP, of course. Thanks so much, Tim Nolan, for joining us on the Oshow. And thank you all for watching the program and for listening wherever you get your great podcasts. Please like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm, of course, and it keeps us bringing you this great content.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow, Oshow.
Your merch band.